Happy September 1st. We are about 121 days from the end of the year. We're about 10 days from marking 20 years since the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And we're waking up this morning and America is no longer at war in Afghanistan. So just take that in for a moment as we sort of orient ourselves turning towards the end of the year and really a new phase, a new chapter, potentially, depending on who you talk to. One of the things I want to do today is just take a moment to reflect on the president's address yesterday, announcing the end of the war. Why does this matter? Why do we pay attention to remarks or addresses like this? It's all storytelling. Journalism is storytelling. A lot of what we're doing in our own lives is storytelling. And what the president did yesterday is he told his version of the story. Now, whether or not his version of the story becomes part of the collective story of the nation eventually is something we can't determine at this time. But there were a couple of things that were part of these remarks that I thought were notable. And I'm using my experience as a journalist to talk a little bit about this. As you know, I'm not going to fact check every item in the remarks. Plenty of other people do that and do that well. I also think it gets a little too editorial. One of the things I just want to do is point out three things that I thought were notable that are something to consider in how the president is telling this story. So first things first, I think what's important to note is the length of time. The president took nearly 30 minutes for these remarks. And what that length of time did was several things. In many ways, it gave him the opportunity for a closing argument. This is why we are ending this war, and this is why this matters. This is what he attempted to do. It also allowed him the bandwidth to go into incredible detail. Things like saying, we've reached out to Americans 19 times since March to try to get them out of Afghanistan, like really specific details. On that, there are two details I want to just make note of for you. One of the things the president said is that as part of his decision in April to end the war in Afghanistan, they decided that August 31st was the date to exit. Because you've heard a lot of different dates and timelines, I just want to clarify that for you because you probably have seen that in our reporting. Back in April, the president announced the end of the war was coming and that it would be done by September 11th. It wasn't until July that the president then said the date is going to be August 31st. So this has been a little bit of an evolution to this time period. July really matters for a couple reasons because we really started to track the Taliban's move at that time. And one of the things the Taliban did, I want to show you a little bit later because that'll kind of bring full circle some of the timeline. The other thing is a fact that you might hear repeated very often, and I want you to know that the White House clarified it after the remarks. The president said that 90% of Americans who wanted to leave Afghanistan were able to leave during this evacuation. If you look back at the transcript, they have corrected that to say 98% of Americans who want to leave Afghanistan were able to leave Afghanistan. So because it's a fact you'll probably hear time and time again, I just want you to know that the White House is now on record saying it's 98%. Something to note. Second thing that I think is really important to know about the remarks is the amount of time that the president did talk about the previous administration. And I say the previous administration because the president did not mention President Trump by name. He said its predecessor, he said the previous administration, but he took time to go deep into what the setup was for him, in his opinion, when he assumed office. And the reason why he believes he really had two choices, to leave or to escalate the war. So he went into depth on that, and I think that's really notable as well. The last thing that I think is really important is the repetition. Again, going back to the length of time, there was a lot of repetition circling around this main point. It is time to end the war. It is time to end the war. It's time to end the war. Despite more than a dozen mentions of the word war, the war on terror wasn't mentioned at all. It was very much focused on what's going on in Afghanistan. Now, the topic of terrorism was mentioned, but that term, war on terror, the president listed many, many reasons for the reason why it's time for America to leave. And I wrote down a couple of them as I was listening again and again last night. He basically said that this was the wrong mission, that it's no longer part of the national interest. It's not vital. It's not a national priority. It's too expensive. He went into that. It's really, it's not focusing on the future. He also said one of the reasons was thinking about our service members. He mentioned not only the injuries of those who have served in war, but the divorces the suicide rates. So he really put a lot of this in together, and he would go back, he'd retrace his steps. So he'd mention something about the reason to end, and he'd return to that point and return to that point and return to that point again, circling around to this is the time to end the war. So that's what, in case you weren't able to watch the full 30 minutes, by the way, it's linked on our website if you'd like to. I think those are a couple things to note in how the administration is now positioning itself to think towards the future, and also provide a full recounting of what's happened in the last several weeks and really the decisions that led up into this point that we're in. All right, two things I want to mention to you from this point on. Two different sources that I saw this morning that I think are worth your time. This was from the Wall Street Journal today, a big feature by them. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan shifts global power and balance. So the Wall Street Journal is trying to give an overview of what our adversaries and allies are thinking about. And for that reason, you know what I want to do? I want to take you to the maps. This is my Vanna White moment that I get every once in a while, but it's very few things can replace pointing to a map and really talking about it. So yes, there's been a lot of criticism about this evacuation process, and that's an understatement. But what does this actually mean for China and Russia, two of the countries that were mentioned by name in the president's address? Let me show you something that the Wall Street Journal was pointing out. So here's a map of, this is Afghanistan, so this part of the world. You can see we've talked a lot about the border that Afghanistan shares with Iran. Interestingly enough, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, on his way out, he was the Secretary of State under the Trump administration, said Iran is the next Afghanistan, or the new Afghanistan. I'd like to ask him about whether or not he still believes that. I think that would be an interesting conversation. But let's focus over here. China and Russia. China and Russia. So one of the things that was mentioned in this article is just thinking about this area of the world. Yes, the United States has left, and it's been somewhat controversial. But now with the United States out of the region, Afghanistan, the Taliban are literally in the backyards of Russia and China. And they know that they will likely have to deal in some way with Afghanistan. Why is that? They all have to have had their own stories when it comes to Islamic terrorism in those particular areas. Look at what Russia was doing just a few weeks ago. This is a military exercise on the border between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan in this part of the world. Let me see if I can pull you back here. So here's Afghanistan, and here's where the Russian military exercises were right here. So they have a presence, a military presence. You do exercises where you want to practice. We do it too. We do it in Europe. We do it a lot of different places. We do it in Asia. Let me show you what was going on with China. We covered this back in July. This is the Taliban meeting with the foreign minister in China. See, this is what was happening in July when the president of the United States announced the withdrawal date to be August 31st. A few weeks after that, the Taliban ended up having this very high-profile meeting with the Chinese government. China, as we haven't gotten too far into this story, but they have a Muslim population in their country called Uyghurs, and they have controversially handled this population. It's a whole other story, but they know that they're going to have to deal with the Taliban at some point. So the question is now, what does that look like for our adversaries? And how does that shift what, as the Wall Street Journal says, global balance? Let me show you something else that I think is really important. This is from the Associated Press, and this is just like a little bit of a tip. The Associated Press also did sort of an overview of the last several years, but I want to make note of something. That picture looks like it's from now, right? Well, that picture is actually from 2009. And this is a critical part of storytelling that I just want you to be aware of. One of the things I'm paying really close attention to is how many photojournalists and independent journalists we have on the ground in Afghanistan. It is very, very few. I mentioned a few of them yesterday. I'll tag them as well in this post because it's important to know who is actually there. The concern, there's been all of these questions about, what we can put on social media, what we can't, what people are seeing, what they can't, censorship and all of that. The concern for me as a journalist right now and being able to report this story for you, which is from far away from Afghanistan, is if and when everything goes dark. We need photojournalists on the ground. We need people to have a record of what's happening in Afghanistan. What makes me concerned is a couple fold. You're going to see a lot of images from Afghanistan. Be sure to check the dates. because a lot of them may not be from now. It's very difficult to verify images at this point, and there are very few people on the ground that are our eyes and ears of what's happening there. It is going to be really important to watch that over the next several weeks. Not just now, not just in the next 48 hours when we're all really, really tuned in about what's actually happening there in the next several weeks and months. So those are a couple of things for us to think about today. It's about the storytelling. The Associated Press in that article said, and I thought this was just interesting, reflecting first day of September. It said, when you're looking at a book, the chapters in the past are written and you have blank pages ahead. My question to you is, what do you want to see written on those blank pages ahead in the collective story that we share? I'll be curious your responses to that. So more reporting on all of this today, but hopefully this kind of gives us a deep breath to reflect on the president's remarks. I put the link to the Wall Street Journal article as well as the remarks from the president on our website, so you could check that out later if you'd like to. In the meantime, enjoy your first day of September. Make it a great start to the month, and I'll see you with more on smartnews.com. Have a great day, guys.